Good morning and good day, everybody from Austria. My name is Yulia Sugandi, and I have the pleasure of accompanying you throughout this IPT online lecture series. Today, we will speak with Dr. Yulia Sugandi from UNDP in Indonesia about grassroots innovation towards planetary justice, the parts that reflect the whole. As our regular participants in the series already know, we focus on speaking about complexity, on reimagining belonging, and are part of the ASPR's overall campaign on Homeland Earth, Terre Patrie. A key person in this campaign and thought is the French philosopher and sociologist Edgar Morin. He is often referred to as the father of complexity theory and has coined the idea of the whole is more than the sum of its parts, and the part is reflecting the whole. Now, Yulia will take us further into this by highlighting that one cannot know the whole if the parts are not known. As head of solutions mapping at UNDP Accelerator Labs, Yulia invites us to dive deeper into aspects of the socio-ecological crisis, to navigate complexity and interdependence, to learn and unlearn as we seek to shift towards planetary justice. Yulia holds a PhD in Anthropology and Sociology from the University of Muenster in Germany, and she's been supporting socio-ecological justice for more than 20 years. She also has extensive research and teaching experience when it comes to questions or aspects of social equity, of inclusive development, positive peace, and human ecology. So thank you so much for joining us today, Yulia. We are really excited to having you here with us. And before handing over to you, I want to mention a few considerations on sharing this space together. Today's session will be very interactive. It will be recorded, but only Yulia's inputs will be put or will be made available on YouTube. So as always, please adjust your camera according to how you would like to be seen. Feel free to ask questions or share with Yulia directly through raising your hand or typing into the chat, and I will then gladly read out your inputs, your comments and observations. I've also been asked to let everyone know 15 minutes prior to the end of the session that we will, in fact, come to an end. And lastly, throughout this lecture series, we strive to reimagine and recreate spaces of belonging, of ways of conversing and connecting that build on kindness and care, on curiosity, reflexivity, and on fostering generative exchange and knowledge. So thank you again and welcome Thank you again and welcome in joining us in this space and endeavor. And a special thank you and welcome to Yulia. I hope you will. Lastly, throughout these lectures, we strive to reimagine and recreate spaces, ways of conversing and connecting that build on care and kindness, on curiosity, reflexivity, fostering generative exchange and knowledge. So thank you for being with us in this space and welcome to everybody, especially the person who are joining us as new participants and members. I hope all of you, and especially Yulia, will enjoy your time with us. And now, over to you, Yulia.
Thank you, Julia. So, as Julia already explained, our discussions today, we will be talking about grassroots innovations toward planetary justice. At the core of our discussions would be about democratizations of social change process. Why do we need to care about grassroots innovations in terms of what is the benefit of our planet, so to speak, if we pay attention on the grassroots innovations? I would like us to go deeper into the power relations of the social change processes. What kind of power relations? This kind of power relations that might have impact on the distribution of justice, not only in horizontal level among ourselves, but also in terms of the planetary justice. So in this part, the first part, let's go deeper into the understanding about the global social ecological lens. So some of you might already familiar with Nicholas Q, especially the ones who are like learning about transdisciplinary. Well, Nicholas Q explained about the relations between subject and object in pre-modernity. So he explained about our relations with the objects in terms of pre-modernity time. The subject was part of the object. So that's why in anthropological research, you might recognize the terminology of mythical lands, where people, like they do not own the land, but the land own the people. So that's in pre-modernity. But what happened during modernity times? The relation between subject and object, they are separate. So that's why before it was like relations of identity between the subject and object, but modernity transformed it into the relations of property. So that's why you have like, I own the land, so the different type of relations. So if you see, the modernity also expose us on more on complexity. Would like us to think, what is your first impressions when you see this complexity diagram? You might just please drop in the chat, just type it so I can see. Feel free to type the drop in the chat. What do you have in mind when you see this complexity diagram? What type of relations that that you see in this diagram? What the first words that come to your mind? Chaos, movement, fluidity. I do not recognize anything. Yes. And what else? What kind of pattern of relations you see? Is it linear? You see that the pattern of relations is chaos, is that? So what else to have in mind? Connected, interconnectedness, yes. Anything else? Yeah, no static pattern. And can you understand where's the root cause, where the impact and how it is interrelated? What do you see here? Can you identify which are the root causes, which are the impacts? Dynamics, yes. Okay, see complexity nodes, dots, yes. Complex, yes. So all of this complexity with all of the attributes that you describe, what do you think, what kind of method you apply to understand the pattern? What type of method to understand, to grasp this pattern? Anybody work on complexity? What type of method? You can also share with us. I mean, you can also unmute yourself, feel free just to share. Graphics, mathematics, what else? To understand the patterns, which are dynamics, interconnectedness, interconnected, intersectionality, spider web. What are the method? Tissue, relational approach. Anybody would like to explain further about the method they applied? Feel free to share. I see that Oliver Nabe explained about tissue. Would you like to explain further, describe further? What do you mean by that?
Yeah,
Fine.
sure. I'm not sure whether I understood the question, but the image of tissue is what came to my mind when I look at the changing pictures after a while. I thought it could be something also, what's the word? Actually roots in the earth of trees that are interconnected or something like that. So I had images in my mind.
That's wonderful. So you see the roots, yeah, the roots inside, and then you beneath the roots, like the trees. Like the trees. So imagine the trees. You have the roots beneath the earth, and you have the really complex relations. The roots like entangles. That's beneath the trees. Thank you so much for sharing. But if we would like to understand the conditions of the tree, first we could see also from the fruits. That is from what you can see. But then to understand the root causes, then you need to learn deeper. You need to go deeper to understand the root causes. So that's one way of the method to understand this complexity. And this is what also we apply that this type of method in UNDP ECLAB. So that's what part of our discussions today. Thank you for the inspirations. Okay, let's move. So the complexity, if you see the pandemic, so like entangled, yeah, in connectedness, pandemic. There are so many already analysis about the root cause of pandemic. Yeah, you see this connectedness between crisis, the health crisis, the global health crisis, entangled with other type of crisis, economic crisis, recessions, ecological crisis, and you see also the bigger crisis of biodiversity collapse. So one crisis leads to another, like you see that entangled. And this type of relations make us reflect to see how we relate again between us, subject, and the object. So different than what Nicholas Q explained, the separations between the subject and object. In reality, if we see this complexity, make us think about our relations between subject and object, because everything like connected. So WHO already made this diagram about how is diversity linked, like what you described beautifully about the root, about the roots of the trees that's entangled beneath, and the fruits coming out from the roots from the tree. Then you see the sustainable development, health outcomes, ecosystems, climate change, food and water security. So all different kind of fruits, which are really the fruits of what is embedded, what he described just now beautifully as the roots of the tree. So with one health concept defines that the health of, you see the roots, the biodiversity, very much interconnectedness with the health of not only the human being, but also the health of all living beings. And this you can see also described very clearly in any regenerative designs, where you see the scale, the local scale between the city scales, how is interconnected with also the scale, like the bigger scale, the world scales. So this type of complexity nowadays. So if you see that there's interconnected between local level and also global, and interconnected between one issues with another, like health issues also related with the other issues, sectorals, this very much fits with the definitions of dimensions of planetary justice. So what is the dimensions of planetary justice? Is held justice beyond national borders? Is justice across generations? It's not only one generations, but across generations, as Roman Knarzik said, how to be a good ancestors. And justice also for non-human. So all of this different type of justice. If we care so much about this, we realize about the health of the planet also very much influenced, interconnected with our own well-being. So why do we need to care also about the social inequality or the minority? Why? What do you think? Why do we need to care about the minority groups in thinking about how to reach planetary justice? You might unmute yourself, or also share with us in a chat. You might type, you might unmute yourself. Feel free. You might share from the theoretical perspective, or you might share also from practical perspective, why, if we care about the planetary justice, we need also to pay attention on the minority groups, why social inequality matters. Please, anybody would like to share? Either type or unmute yourself, feel free. We are sharing here.
Hi, can I go in?
Of course, sure.
Yes. I think it has been very common to see the narratives that we have to actively engage and include minority groups and indigenous people in terms of talking or even composing public policies in order to achieve planetary justice. I think this is because the minorities and indigenous groups, mostly they have fostered their own culture in a way that they do not wield any the perspective of economically constructed culture, but rather a culturally constructed economy, which is an economy that works for everyone, that adheres only to what we need rather than making what we want into what we need. Consumerism, all of the active exploitation of the environment, of the earth resources, treating it as it is always no between the boundary of renewable and non-renewable, but it's beyond that. What the perspective of indigenous groups and minorities, I think, because they are also the most disenfranchised and the most disadvantaged group in terms of when we cannot achieve any planetary justice. So I think
Okay.
I think that's why we need to actively include them. Yeah.
Thank you. So one of the reasons explained perfectly. Why do we need to care? If we care about biodiversity, then from the report from Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services in 2019, who are the frontliners? Who are the frontliners of our, who guard the biodiversity? Based on this report, mentions about the roles, the important roles of indigenous people and local communities. So they are the frontliners. So you see, like the ironically, people, communities who are perceived as the most vulnerable groups, becoming like the frontliners in terms of maintaining our biodiversity and ecosystems services. This is the starting point of our discussions. Why we need to pay attention on the parts, not only the parts that, the wholes that greater than sums of the parts, but also the parts could define also the wholes and reflections of the wholes. So after we understand about the global social ecological perspective, now we go deep into these democratic social change processes, like what in the terms of development paradigms, you see also the relevance gap between our approach, current approach, and also the complexity, which is very dynamic and really entangled, very interconnectedness. So we need a new approach in terms of understandings, development, and social change processes in the complex world. So there are three questions. How do we better tackle complex and fast-moving challenges? The one, the graphic that we already saw. How do we find the most relevant solutions that work locally? How do we learn more quickly about what works and what doesn't work? So one way to understand the systems is to get in touch with the systems itself. To get in touch with the systems itself, starting from the bottom, like when we discussed already about the role of the communities and also indigenous peoples in maintaining the biodiversity. So UNDP up for answering these questions by setting up Accelerator Lab, a network of 91 labs serving in 115 countries. Indonesia is part of the second cohort, additional 31 labs. But we are a different kind of accelerator, so to speak. Accelerated learning about what works and what doesn't work in development, so we can get faster results on the ground. So focus so much on the grassroots innovations a new method how to tackle this complexity. But one of the attributes that needs to be there in order to have these innovations is to know the unknown. Like the reflections from Robert Chambers, where he would like to understand about what is explored about what kind of development practice have we had so far, is going into the unknown. But they have also to have this kind of attribute of reflexivity, to understand, to know the unknown. We need to have the capacity to reconsider the core values. Be something different when necessary, rather than just do something different. So it means that really need to understand the core values of driven values of doing things. Be aware and question own attitudes, thought processes, values, assumptions, prejudice, and habitual actions. So this kind of reflexivity is the starting point for us to go into the unknown, so to speak, to know the unknown part, to provide a really enabling space for that innovations to come up. So with the development approach so far, it's been like based on the expert-oriented approach. Now we would like us again to pay attention on the power relations, how we would like to, that provide the enabling space for innovations to take place. The first one is the supply side, supplying innovations. So the innovations designer-led. Designers develop social solutions for end user. This is like 4. And the second one is with. It's co-creations, do it together. Designer develops solutions with end user. It is co-creations. And the third one is user-led. Solutions developed by end user for themselves, their families, and their communities. Can anybody know what the 4 designer-led an example? For instance, design thinking, human-centered design, hackathons, behavioral insight. The ones who are already familiar with transdisciplinary know about this co-creations approach. Co-creations, co-design, participatory design. And the user-led, for instance, the grassroots innovations, user-led innovation, solutions mapping, positive deviance. Because today discussions about grassroots innovation, so we're talking about this one. The solutions are developed by end user for themselves. Can you see the different power dynamics here? The dynamic, the power driven by the user-led, providing a space for the organic social change to take place, because it comes from these definitions. Grassroots innovation and expressions of a need based on the deep experiential knowledge of a problem, which is often not addressed by government or NGOs. Grassroots innovations are created by people who are affected by an issue, directly or indirectly. They are not created by private companies, NGOs, or government. So this type of reflexivity allow us to see, to appreciate that different type of knowledge productions. So the experiential knowledge also needs to have the space for this. So by being reflexive, by going into knowing the unknown, providing a space for the grassroots also to take place, we appreciate the experiential knowledge developed by impacted communities, because they will tell you more about not only the solutions, but also the needs and unmet needs. So the solutions developed by the grassroots not only describe about the capacity or the assets, but also can tell you more about the complexity, the context, which are the needs that are being addressed, which are the needs that not being addressed or not being met. So the needs and the solutions goes in hand together. So these are the quote from Anil Gupta: "Minds on the margin are not marginal minds." See, like this is also, if you would like to discuss about democratizations of social change processes, this is also democratizations of knowledge productions, where everybody can also generate knowledge in terms of also experiential knowledge. These are some examples of grassroots innovations collected by my fellow ACLABs. For instance, one in Iraq, they developed this type of soap for children during pandemic. In India, can address also the needs from physically challenged persons in a car, to drive a car. And in Thailand, you see like the share pantry. Could be also like assistance, socials and solidarity, social cohesions, cope with the needs of people with disability, children, or these farmers in Colombia or in Zambia, also about the alternative, really good green energy. In Philippines, we have this full piece of Wi-Fi. And one of the interesting analysis, for instance, made by fellow ACLABers in Philippines, describe about this fellow Wi-Fi. If we see and understanding about the needs expressions from the solutions, the deep root causes of why this grassroots innovations is there at first place, because it's deep rooted in poverty. So it can tell you more about the context. So how the Accelerator Lab Indonesia apply this approach? Well, to understand the systems is now to understand from the bottom, but also collectively. Cannot understand the systems also from linear approach. That's why it has to be done collectively. And in this moment in Indonesia, Accelerator Lab Indonesia, we are trying also to understand, to unbox socio-ecological crisis in urban context. This is one of the study case that we are doing now, to understand system resilience, and how to understand system resilience by involving the grassroots innovations. To give you also a context about our city, our capital city in Jakarta, there's recent also report from Frederick Macrop. This, I think it's only like a couple weeks ago. This report says about 99 out of 100 most risked urban cities are located in Asia. And Jakarta is on the top of that list as the most environmentally risked city in the world. So this is like a planetary pressures. So how we see UNDP view this in Human Development Report, to understand that we would like to reduce planetary pressures, we need also to understand the persisting inequality. Because here, equity, innovation, and stewardship of nature can break the vicious cycles of socio-ecological. So we, in Accelerated Life Indonesia, we dive deep into to understand what is the how to understand the complexity of the water-related disasters. You see, like in urban context, if we see like local socio-ecological lens, what does it mean? Is this part that you use the frame of donut economic in the urban context? So what would it mean for the people of Jakarta to thrive? This local social lens. So what would it mean for Jakarta to relate with the well-being of the people worldwide? Like one of the things that mentions from the report, but the air quality is mentions about the one of the root causes of the poor air quality was from the factories nearby the Jakarta. But at garment factories, but that's also related to, you know, global social lens. So you cannot talk about the flooding and other ecological crises without also connecting it with the bigger context. So what in local ecological context, what would it mean for Jakarta to thrive within its natural habitat? But what would it mean for Jakarta to respect the health of the whole planet? So all of this different type of local, social, and ecological lens help us to understand the interconnectedness of the complexity of the context, even if we would like to understand, to unbox the ecological crisis such as flooding in a capital city. So we embarked our study by learning the different type of challenges faced by different cities in Indonesia in dealing with flooding. We found that some cities are able to do co-creations. You see a different diagram that we described, co-creations in biopowering. Now this kind of water conservations, co-creations between the impacted communities and the universities, the academics. And we found also some user-led innovations, which are already replicated by our ministry. It's also about the water conservations. But somehow, we understood that some of the areas are still stuck in the coping mechanisms and not being able to move forward adaptations. So as a coping mechanisms, it's fine. We've seen so many different type of grassroots innovations, but some other contexts can move forward into more adaptations frame, like practice and result that sustain, oriented toward long-term livelihood security, continuous process, and so on. But some are not able to move there. So why in some areas, in some cities are able to, you know, to have this grassroots innovations, and some others are not? So we understood there are some enabling constraints from complex systems. It turned out to be the issues about flooding is not only about flooding. So it's also related to the other issues. So the ones who are still in complex coping mechanisms, they have so many disruptive elements. They are not able to build this grassroots innovations. They have disruptive elements, social and ecological elements there. And very much also related to human security, ecological relations, social cohesions. This is about floating. So see how complex if we go deeper into the entanglement, like the trees that you described. So we understood this by understanding the grassroots innovations can tell us a lot about the richness of the context. And we feel that by unbox these grassroots innovations, we can unbox also like really bigger pictures of the complexity. So now we embark to our new learning by including the emic perspective and experiences for policy designs. So that first part of the learning make us realize the importance of reducing proximity between the policy makers and impacted communities. So the ones who are, the government who make policies, they should be in touch more with the systems. By being in touch more with understanding the context from bottom. So we are now supporting the National Development Agency, especially on water and irrigation systems, on infrastructures against water-related disasters by including the emic perspective and experience from impacted communities. Because they're the ones who can, they're the expert. They're the one who can tell you more about how the systems work, what are the bottlenecks, and so on and so forth. And you can understand also by unbox these grassroots innovations, you can understand the capacities of the communities. And if we would like also to design the interventions, then the interventions, the designs would strengthen what's already there. Yeah. So these are the immersions that we are doing now. The immersions, it means immerse in the context. You immerse in the context, reducing the proximity between the policymakers and also the impacted communities. By gaining the emic perspective from the communities, by appreciating and reflecting on experiential learning that's provided by the impacted communities. So then this experiential learning would be able to give you to see, feel, and make the change. So these are an example of collaborations that we do, because I think the mindset should be like the collective mindsets, is not individual mindsets. Yeah, these are an examples of the method. So what are the attributes that we need? What are the mental models, the thinking framework, if we would like to see how the benefits of accommodating the grassroots innovations in terms of supporting our planetary justice? What are the mental models? I think the first one is that real learning. System thinking approach requires a very deep and persistent commitment to real learning. One of the approaches advocated is unlearning. To unlearn is the first step, to unlearn from our sense of expert, and also open for democratizations of knowledge productions. And we need also to be prepared to be wrong. And so there's no such thing as an absolute truth. And acknowledge that our ways of working might have contributed to the problem even. So we should be able to challenge our own mental models in pursuit of finding non-obvious areas of leverage. I think we need also to be comfortable with, embracing uncertainty. Because I think it's also just now that we saw in the chat. Yeah, where to go, because it's dynamic. There's an element of uncertainty. So we need to familiarize ourselves with uncertainty. with the unknown, going into the unknown, as Robert Chambers described. And of course, you need to triangulate informations, different people, perspective, of course. So what are the attributes telling us in terms of innovative and collaborative actions? So we need first eco-literacy. Values that we need for ecological worldview is biospheric orientations, competencies, protective and restorative actions, and system perspective, sense of interconnectedness, stakeholder engagement, emotional intelligence, but self-other awareness, values, being compassion, competence, proactive local sensitivity, and spiritual intelligence. You know, you propose oneness with all that is and contemplative practices. So these are 4 elements that provide a really good space for innovative and collaborative actions through understanding the benefit of grassroots innovations toward the planetary justice. Yeah, so as closing, I would like to quote this one of a poem from one of my favorite Sufi poet. Before we can learn, we need to learn how to learn. And before we can learn how to learn, we need to learn how to unlearn. So I'll give to Julia now.
Thank you, Yulia, for your inputs. That was really, really interesting. There were many aspects that really resonated with us, for example, with the questions we've asked ourselves around uncertainty, around complexity, how to learn faster. When we designed this annual campaign, but also thinking then further about how are we able to engage with uncertainty? What are factors that support us to see or experience uncertainty much more as a chance and an opportunity for growth than a risk and a constraint? So we are really excited now to further come into this debate and discussion. But before we do so, I want to say goodbye to our audience members from YouTube. Thank you for joining us, and I want to send you off with the inspiration or the appreciation of local knowledge, of knowledge production in multiple ways, and also an appreciation and an inspiration to engage with uncertainty as a chance as much as you can. Thank you, and I hope to see you again for the next series or the next lecture.